Hi folks, we come to the 10th video in the series and part 2 of our continuing hunt for the real Margaret Moffat. And in the last video we concluded that Margaret was not Margaret Armstrong at all. Consequently, we must focus on the other surnames given in her second marriage certificate and on the birth certificate of her first daughter Mary. As previously noted, Hulhan and Hullican are just two variants of the surname Houlahan. So let's start with Mary's birth certificate. This records Margaret's maiden name as Hullican. As noted in a previous video, a search of the census records for a Margaret Hullican draws a blank. Similarly, there are no other children born to a Moffat-Hullican couple. We have to conclude that this is actually a dead end, so a change of tack is needed. In the various online censuses, we can carry out searches that ignore the surname and look for people with just their first name. A search of the website ancestry.co.uk setting first name as Margaret, exact birth year range from 1842 to 1844 and a place Carlisle, exact, this brings up 351 records. Modifying that and setting the surname to sounds like Hullican draws a blank. On the Find My Pass website, setting the surname to sounds like Houlhan, 3 entries are found, but actually all of them relate to the baptism of the same Margaret Holihan, whose father's name is Hugh and mother's name was Mary. This may be our Margaret, given that the father's name is correct and the surname is a possible variant, but it doesn't really help us to move on. A search of the GRO index for a Margaret Hollahan locates one born on the 26th of April 1843 in St Pancras, London. Sadly, her birth certificate reveals that this is not the Margaret we are looking for. As it turns out, her father is called Robert Hollihan, and he's a tailor. So, another dead end. So now we turn to Margaret's second marriage. In 1901, Margaret has it recorded that her father's name was Hugh Houlahan, and that he was a private in an infantry regiment. A search of the Forces War Records reveals an incident report of a Hugh Holihan, service number 126, who is a sergeant in the 59th Regiment of Foot in 1841, and are stationed in Antigua. Unfortunately, there is no indication of what the incident was. So what can we find out about the 59th Regiment of Foot? It was formed upon the disbandment of the 50th Regiment and the 51st Regiment at the end of August 1782, when they became the 59th 2nd Nottinghamshire Regiment of Foot. In 1804 it was redesignated as the 1st Battalion, 59th Regiment of Foot, when a 2nd Battalion was formed. But when the 2nd Battalion was disbanded in 1816 after the Napoleonic Wars, it was once again redesignated 59th 2nd Nottinghamshire Regiment of Foot. It was disbanded in July 1881 when it was united with the 30th Cambridgeshire Regiment of Foot to form the East Lancashire Regiment. And who knows what the logic is behind all of that. The regiment's postings between 1817 and 1880 are as listed, and we can see that the regiment was in the West Indies, so confirming that this is where Hugh Holihan was stationed. But depending on how long Hugh was in the army, it may be difficult to find him in the censuses. So, another change of tack, and following a suggestion made by Colin Moffat, the keeper of the Clan Moffat database, looking at the 1861 census entry for George and Margaret Moffat, one of the other people living in the home of Thomas McMurray is a Jane Hulhan, a surname which is one of the variants found in the forebears.io list. Jane is 14 years old, and a niece of Thomas and Jane. Now we also know that John Moffat, son of George and Margaret, is recorded as their nephew in 1871. Given their ages, maybe Jane, who's 14, is the sister of Margaret, aged 18. Now a search of the GRO index draws a blank for a Jane Hulhan, or other variant, born to a Hugh and Mary. But on the Find My Past website, a baptismal entry turns up in the parish register of St Mary's, Carlisle, of a Jane Hulhan, daughter of Hugh and Mary Hulhan, on the 3rd of May 1846. Which brings us back to Margaret Hollahan, baptised in the same church and, it would seem, the same parents. So a search of the 1851 census suggests that a Jane and Margaret are living with their parents Hugh and Mary in Bridge Lane, Carlisle. However, this was not easy to discover, as 3 of the websites that make the 1851 census available have a different transcription for the surname. On the Family Search website, the surname is Hooloham. On the Ancestry website, the surname is Hollohan. And on the UK Online Census website, the surname is Hullihan. Nonetheless, this entry reveals a large family. There's Hugh, aged 45, born around 1806 in that case, in Ireland and a Chelsea pensioner. There's Mary, aged 43, born in 1808, in Carlisle and a washerwoman. John, aged 19, so born around 1832 in Scotland and a cotton handloom weaver. Then there's William, aged 18, who was therefore born about 1833 in Ireland. There's Hugh, aged 14, so born around 1837 on the island of Malta. Thomas, aged 11, born therefore in 1840 in Carlisle. Margaret, aged 8, born therefore about 1843, and Jane, aged 4, born about 1847, both of them in Carlisle. A significant entry is that a 14-year-old Hugh was born on Malta, and this ties in with the fact that the 59th Regiment of Foot were stationed on Malta at that time. That Thomas was born in Carlisle in 1840 would suggest that at least his mother was then in Carlisle, and as a Chelsea pensioner, Hugh had left the army before 1851. If we look at the 1841 census, we find the family is living in Bridge Lane, but this time with the surname Hooland. So we've got Hugh, aged 30, therefore born around 1811 in Ireland, and he's an agricultural labourer. Mary, aged 30, so again born around 1811, but in the county of Cumberland. James, aged 11, born 1830, but not in the county. John, aged 9, born therefore around 1832 in Scotland. William, aged 7, so therefore born around 1834 in Ireland. Hugh, aged 5, born around 1836, but again not in the county. And Thomas, aged 2, so therefore born in 1839, in the county. Although the calculated birth years for Hugh and Mary are different from the 1851 census, and Hugh's occupation is an agricultural labourer, the children's names and birthplaces would suggest that this is the same family. Finding Hugh in the 1841 census begs the question, when was he discharged from the army? We know that Hugh and the 59th Infantry Regiment were in Antigua on the 1st of January 1841, as recorded in the Forces War Records, so he must have left after then, but before the 6th of June that year, when the census was taken. Perhaps he had to work in the fields when he returned before he started receiving his pension. Meanwhile, when it comes to the 1861 census, although we know where Margaret's sister Jane is living, I have yet to locate the rest of the family. From the 1851 census, we can see that William was born in Ireland in about 1833. The 59th Regiment of Foot was in Ireland about this time, so a search of the Find My Past website reveals that a William Houlahan was baptised in February 1834 at Mullingar which is in the Diocese of Meath in the county of Westmeath in Ireland, and his parents were Hugh Houlahan and Mary Armstrong. If this is Our Mary, this would then answer the question of where Margaret got her surname from when she married George. However, it does not answer the question as to why she decided to use her mother's surname rather than her father's. Meanwhile, given that their eldest son James was born around 1830, we can suggest that Hugh and Mary were married in the 1820s. A search of Ancestry.com for a marriage of a Houlahan and an Armstrong reveals that Hugh Houlahan, although transcribed as Woolstan from Ireland, got married at Gretna Green to a Mary Armstrong of the parish of St Mary's, Carlisle, on the 10th of July 1825. Mary's parish is also where both Margaret and Jane were baptised. As to Mary's age, the 1851 census would suggest that she was born around 1808, which means she was about 17 when she got married to Hugh, who was perhaps 19 or 20. Going to Gretna Green would suggest this is another case of a marriage without parental approval. Meanwhile, there is a discrepancy in the two source documents in that the name of Hugh's parish is transcribed as Island Kings County Beaver in one and Island Sligo Buscar in the other. I have yet to discover a parish in Kings County that matches, and unfortunately there are no relevant parish registers online as yet. As to the family's whereabouts in 1861, the fact that Jane is staying with her aunt and uncle would suggest that the family has moved elsewhere, or at least out of Carlisle. There are still things to be discovered, but I think we can conclude with some confidence that Margaret was born a Houlahan, and that she was born and baptised in Carlisle in early 1843, and that she adopted to use her mother's maiden name of Armstrong. And yet, if she hadn't put her real surname on Mary's birth certificate, and if she hadn't married again, none of this would have been discoverable. Such is the nature of family tree research. We can now redraw the family tree by adding the details of the Hooloham family. We are still left with a number of questions. For instance, where are Margaret's family in 1861? Why did Margaret use her mother's maiden name rather than her father's surname? And what can we discover about Hugh's army career and when he actually left? These are questions that require further research. So, for the moment, having sorted out Margaret Moffat, we can turn to George Moffat's early life, and this is the subject of the next video.